Alright, guys. Again, this is a segue to talk about a deep discrimination that seems to sort of be coming out more or less. Um, this is a little unrelated to LGBT discrimination, but I will get to it soon enough. Alright, the scion of the great lineage of conservative intellectuals now faces federal charges for allegedly storming the Capitol on January 6th, according to newly unsealed court records. The man, who is allegedly Leo Brent Bazel IV, wasn't particularly hard to spot. He wore a hoodie with the words Hershey Christian Academy on it as he strolled around the Senate chamber, according to an FBI agent's affidavit, giving plenty of material to online sleuths who later tipped off law enforcement. He's now charged with obstructing an official proceeding, disorderly conduct, and entering a restricted building. I was going to actually make this a part of a greater Capitol riot, individuals who are a part of it, but I would just get so sidetracked into another saga, so I'm sticking to the current situation. I'm sorry, guys. This could branch out into so many things. Alright. The alleged rioter's great uncle. Wait. Oh, sorry. But that's not the most noticeable thing about Leo. His father is L. Brent Bazel III, a well-known conservative media activist who founded the right-wing outlets CNS News and Media Research Center. The alleged rioter's great-uncle is William F. Buckley Jr., the towering conservative intellectual known for, among other things, founding the National Review and later threatening to punch Gore Vidal in the face. The charges against Bazel were filed under seal on Thursday, unsealed on Friday, and entered into the federal court system online database on Tuesday. To his friends, according to the FBI, Buckley's great-nephew is known as Zeker Bazel and is a former girls' basketball coach in Pennsylvania. That's how the anonymous witness identified the man to federal law enforcement, alongside a tip the witness submitted showing Bazel posted for a photo with a student athlete and a basketball trophy. Still, Bazel does appear to share the familial interest in media. In the Senate, he allegedly moved a large camera so that it faced the ground, diverting the machine's view from the stream of protesters entering the chamber, the FBI noted. I'm sure there's more to talk about this guy, but this is a very short article that I didn't really intend for it to be. Alright. Now to the main point of that segue. William F. Buckley Jr. William Frank Buckley Jr., born William Francis Buckley, November 24th, 1925, February 27th to 2008, was an American conservative writer, public intellectual, and political commentator. In 1955, he founded the National Review, the magazine that stimulated the conservative movement in the mid-20th century United States. Buckley hosted 1,429 episodes of the public affairs television show Firing Line, 1966 to 1999, the longest-running public affairs show with a single host in American television history, where he became known for his distinctive mid-Atlantic accent and wide vocabulary. Born in New York City, Buckley served stateside in the United States Army during the Second World War. After the war, he attended Yale University, where he engaged in debate and right-wing political commentary. Afterward, he worked for 2 years in the Central Intelligence Agency. In addition to the editorials in National Review, Buckley wrote God and Man at Yale. I don't know if I said that already. 1951, and more than 50 other books on the diverse topics, including writing, speaking, history, politics, and sailing. His works include a series of novel features, fictitious CIA agent Blackford Oaks, as well as nationally syndicated newspaper column. Buckley called himself both a conservative and a libertarian. George H. Nass, a historian of the modern American conservative movement, said in 2008 that Buckley was, quote, arguably the most important public intellectual in the United States in the past half century. For an entire generation, he was the preeminent voice of the American conservatism and its first great ecumenical figure, end quote. Conversely, political consultant Stuart Stevens, who served as a top strategist on Mitt Romney's 2012 presidential campaign and later as a leading figure with the Lincoln Project, writes that, quote, for all his well crafted sentences and love of language, Buckley was often a more articulate version of the same deep ugliness and bigotry that is the hallmark of Trumpism. Alright, so I sort of want to skip past some things here and get to a main point of things. Um, Although, if you guys want me to read a little more of this, I will, but. Oh, actually, the religion might seem important just for background. Um, Buckley was a Catholic and was a member of the Knights of Malta. He described his faith by saying, quote, I grew up, as reported, in a large family of Catholics without even a decent ratio of tentativeness. Uh, without a decent ration of tentativeness among the lot of us about our religious faith, end quote. When he attended Millbrook School, Buckley was permitted to attend Catholic Mass at a nearby church despite the school's Protestant affiliation. As a youth, he became aware of the perceived anti-Catholic bias in the United States through reading American Freedom and Catholic Power, a Paul Blanchard book that accused American Catholics of having divided loyalties. Okay. The release of his book, God and Men at Yale, in 1951 was met with some specific criticisms pertaining to his Catholicism. George Bundy, dean of Harvard at the time, wrote in The Atlantic that, quote, it seems strange for any Roman Catholic to undertake to speak for the Yale religious tradition, end quote. Henry Sloane Coffin, a Yale trustee, accused Buckley's book of, quote, being distorted by his Roman Catholic point of view, end quote, and stated that Buckley, quote, should have attended Fordham or some similar institution, end quote. Ah, yes, of course, the infighting, even back then. In his 1997 book, Nearer, My God, Buckley condemned what he viewed as the Supreme Court's war against religion in public schools, and argued that Christian faith was being replaced by another God, quote, multiculturalism, end quote. As an adult, Buckley regularly attended the Tridentine Mass in Connecticut. He disapproved of the liturgical reforms after the Second Vatican Council. Buckley also revealed an interest in the writings and revelations of the 20th century Italian writer Maria Valtorta. In his spiritual memoir, Buckley reproduced Valtorta's detailed accounts of Jesus Christ's crucifixion. These accounts were based on Valtorta's missionary experience of Christ and the mystical revelations that recorded in her book, the poem of the man God. Okay. Okay. So I always hear about this McCarthy situation, and in the comments section, explain to me what this whole McCarthy thing is about, if you've made it this far in any of my videos. Alright. In 1945, Buckley and his brother-in-law, L. Brent Bozell Jr., co-authored a book, McCarthy and His Enemies. Bozell worked with Buckley at the American Mercury in the early 1950s when it was edited by William Bradford Huey. The book defended Senator Joseph McCarthy as a patriotic crusader against communism and asserted that McCarthyism is a movement about which men of good will and stern morality can close ranks. Buckley and Bazell described McCarthy as responding to a communist, quote, ambition to occupy the world. They conceded that he was often guilty of exaggeration. He believed the cause he pursued was just. Um, okay. Buckley founded National Review in 1955 at a time when there was few publications devoted to conservative commentary. He served as the magazine's editor-in-chief until 1990. During that time, National Review became the standard bearer of American conservatism, promoting the fusionism of traditional conservatism and libertarians, examining post-war conservative intellectual history. Kim Phillips Fein writes, quote, the most influential synthesis of the subject remains George H. Nash's The Conservative Intellectual Tradition since 1945. He argued the post-war conservatism brought together three powerful and partially contradictory intellectual currents that previously had largely been independent of each other: libertarianism, traditionalism, and anti-communism. Each particular strain of thought had predecessors earlier in the 20th and even 19th centuries, but they were joined in their distinctive post-war formulation through the leadership of William F. Buckley Jr. and National Review. The fusion of these different competing and not easily reconciled schools of thought led to the creation, Nash argued, of a coherent modern right. Okay. Skipping some things. Hmm. Oh, actually, I remember this Young Americas for Freedom. I believe Young America First. I believe that's being overtaken by people like Nick Fuentes and this dude who looks like some like far right Danny Tamborelli or something. All right, I said looks like, not. I wasn't trying to name drop him as a suspect. That's just. I wish I knew like his name, other because it's just like so silly. All right. Sorry, I'm skipping so much. The main focus of what I wanted to read and segue with him is all the way at the bottom for the most part. Um, okay. Race and segregation. In 1950s and early 1960s, Buckley opposed federal civil rights legislation and expressed support for continued racial segregation in the South. In Freedom Is Not Enough, the opening of the American workplace, author Nancy McLean states in the National Review made James J. Kilpatrick a prominent supporter of the segregation in the South. Quote, its voice on the civil rights movement and the Constitution, as Buckley and Kilpatrick united North and South in a shared vision for the nation that included upholding white supremacy. End quote. In August 24th, 1957 issue of the National Review, Buckley's editorial, quote, Why the South Must Prevail, end quote, spoke out explicitly in favor of temporary segregation in the South until, quote, long-term equality could be achieved. What, you're just going to keep people in camps until racism is defeated? Okay, sure. Obviously, I'm being hyperbolic, but that's just the basic gist. Anyways, Buckley opined that temporary segregation in the South was necessary at the time because the black population lacked the education, economic, and cultural development to make racial equality possible. Okay, then. Buckley claimed that the white South had, quote, the right to impose superior mores for whatever period it takes to affect a genuine cultural equality between the races, end quote. Buckley said white Southerners were, quote, entitled to disenfranchise black voters, quote, because, for the time being, it is the advanced race. Jesus Christ. Alright, end quote. Buckley characterized blacks as distinctly ignorant, quote, the great majority of the Negroes of the South who do not vote do not care to vote, and who not know and would not know what to do if they could. What? Okay. 2 weeks after that editorial was published, another prominent conservative writer, L. Brent Bozell Jr., Buckley's brother-in-law, wrote in the National Review, quote, the magazine was expressed views the magazine has expressed views on racial questions on the racial question that I consider dead wrong and capable of doing great hurt to the promotion of conservative causes. This is a law. There is a law involved and a constitution, and the editorial gives white Southerners leave to violate them in order to give the Negro politically impotent. To keep, okay, sorry, to keep them politically impotent. Um, Buckley visited South Africa in 1960 on several paid fact funding missions in which he supported publications that supported the South African government's policy of apartheid. On January 15th, 1963, the day after George Wallace, the white supremacist governor of Alabama, made his, quote, segregation forever inaugural address. Buckley published a feature essay in National Review on his recent, quote, South African fortnight, concluding it with these words concerning apartheid, quote, I know it is a sincere people's effort to fashion the land of peace they want so badly. In his report, Buckley tried to define apartheid and came up with 4 axioms on which the policy stands. The fourth being, quote, the notion that the Bantu could particularly participate in power on equal terms with the whites is the worst kind of ideology and social romance, end quote. After publishing this defense of Henrik Verwoerd government, Buckley wrote that he was, quote, bursting with pride over the West German social critic Wilhelm Rupp's praise of the peace. Okay. Politico indicates that during the administration of Lyndon B. Johnson, Buckley's writer grew more accommodating toward the civil rights movement. In his columns, he ridiculed practices designed to keep African Americans off the voter registration rolls. Quote, condemn proprietors of commercial establishments who declined service to African Americans in violation in the recently enacted 1964 Civil Rights Act, and showed that little patience for Southern politicians who incited racial violence and race baited in their campaigns. According to Politico, the turning point for Buckley was when white supremacists set off a bomb in a Birmingham church on September 15th, 1963, which resulted in the deaths of 4 African American girls. A biographer said that Buckley privately wept about it when he found out about the incident. Um, okay. Yeah, it's tying back to him, and now he's in trouble, so now he's just like, oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah. Crying not because it happened, crying that he got caught about it. Alright. But he disagreed with the concept of structural racism and placed a large amount of blame for lack of economic growth on the black community itself, most prominently during the highly publicized 1965 debate on the Cambridge Union with African American writer James Baldwin in which Baldwin carried the floor vote 544 to 165 64. In the late 1990s, Buckley disagreed with segregationist George Wallace of Alabama, debating against Wallace's segregationist platform on January 19th, 1968 episode of Firing Line. Buckley later said he wished National Review had been more supportive of civil rights legislation in the 1960s. He grew up to admire Martin Luther King and supported the creation of Martin Luther King Jr. Day. A 2004 Buckley told Time, quote, "I once believed we could evolve our way up from Jim Crow. I was wrong. Federal intervention was necessary." End quote. The same year, he endeavored to clarify his earlier comments on race, saying, quote, "The point I made about white culture supremacy was sociological." End quote. Buckley also linked his usage of the word advancement to its usage in the name NAACP, saying that, quote, "The call for the advancement of colored people presupposes they are behind, which they were in 1958 by any standards of measurement." Okay. Lots of context not being discussed there, but whatever. Anti-Semitism. I believe he was actually pretty pro-Jewish, so that's good at least. During 1950s, Buckley worked to remove anti-Semitism from the conservative movement and barred anti-Semites from working for National Review. When Norman Podhoretz demanded that the conservative movement banish paleo-conservative columnists Patrick Buchanan and Joseph Sobran, who, according to cultural critic Jeffrey Hart, had promulgated a, quote, neo Neos neo-isolation neo-isolationist nativism tinged with anti-Semitism. Buckley would have none of it, and wrote that Buchanan and Sobran, a colleague of Buckley and formerly a senior editor of National Review, were not anti-Semitic, but anti-Israel. Clearly a difference, but most people like to just extrapolate. Okay. In 1991, Buckley wrote a 40,000-word article denouncing Buchanan. He wrote, quote, "I find it impossible to defeat Pat Buchanan against the charge that what he did and said during the period under examination amounted to anti-Semitism." End quote. But concluded, quote, "If you ask, do I think Pat Buchanan is an anti-Semite, my answer is he is not one, but I think he's said some anti-Semitic things." I suppose that's pretty common. Like, people don't necessarily hate or fear people. They just say ignorant shit, and it just happens to, you know, yeah, it's racist and sort of anti-Semitic, even if you don't mean to, I guess. It's just learn. Pretty sure all you gotta do is, watch yourself. Okay. Conservative Rogers Scruton wrote, quote, "Buckley used the pages of the National Review to distance conservatism from anti-Semitism, and from any kind of racial stereotyping. The important goal for him was to establish a believable stance toward the modern world in which all Americans, whatever their race or background, could be included, and which would uphold the religious and social traditions of the American people, as well as the institutions of government as the founder had conceived them." What the heck? Alright, gay rights, and this is the main emphasis. Buckley took a middle course on the issue of gay rights and sexual ethics. He strongly opposed gay marriage, but supported the legalization of homosexual relations. In a March 18th, 1986 New York Times op-ed, Buckley addressed the AIDS epidemic, calling it, quote, "a fact that AIDS is the special curse of the homosexual, end quote. He argued that people infected, sorry, what the fuck is wrong with me, with HIV should marry only if they agreed to sterilization, and that universal testing led by insurance companies, not the government, should be mandatory. Most controversially, he wrote, quote, everyone detected with AIDS should be tattooed in the upper forearm to protect common needle users and on the buttocks to prevent the victimization of other homosexuals, end quote. The piece led to much criticism. Some gay activists advocated boycotting Patricia Buckley's fundraising efforts for AIDS. William Buckley later backtracked from the piece, but in 2004 he told the New York Times Magazine, quote, if the protocol had been accepted, many who caught the infectious unguardedly would be alive, probably over 1 million. Yeah, but you're gonna sterilize a group of people so they can't propagate anymore. This person obviously wasn't thinking this through, or this was his plan all along, to act sympathetic when you're slowly removing a population. Alright. And so here we are with this type of crazy shit in our world. Oh. Oh, I guess that's the end of this segment. Alright. Stay strong, guys.